Okay, so I just got back home today after quadruple bypass open heart surgery 4 days ago. That's first. Never seen that in my life. Never hope to see it again either. They took veins out of my left leg and they replaced four veins for arteries in my heart that were nearly completely clogged. I guess that will teach me to eat all that Taco Bell all these years, right? So anyway, what I wanted to talk about tonight, since I just got home from the hospital and quadruple bypass surgery, and I'm seeing online this revival that's taken place, Asbury revival in Kentucky, at a Christian college, and I'm actually no stranger to watching a Christian revival start. Back in 1989, 1990, I was living in Southern California, trying to do the music thing out there, playing gigs. I had just gotten married, and I was watching football on TV in California, and I was still a CU football fan, being born and raised in Colorado. So I was a Broncos fan, CU football fan, and I was watching this new coach for the CU Buffaloes, Bill McCartney, who I'd heard was a strong Christian, and I was watching him retool the team into a national champion, which I'd never seen before from the Buffaloes. And I watched this dude who was a charismatic Christian coach turn a very mediocre CU Buffaloes team into a full-blown national champion in just a few years. But so I kept watching this guy, Bill McCartney, and watching him in press conferences locally and on TV, and I'm like, wow, that dude is a really, really strong, on fire Christian, that Coach McCartney. So I kept watching him. Then I heard he'd started this thing, this Christian men's group called Promise Keepers around 1990, 91. And I was following him this whole time because I'd become a Christian about 4 or 5 years before that. And I was doing the music industry out in California, doing the hip jazz clubs, and had moved to Orange County from LA because I just got married and it was a lot nicer down there in Orange County. And I was starting to connect with a lot of these really good Christian musicians that were professionals but that were also really strong Christians. And I started playing these churches. This one guy asked me if I wanted to play at his church, and it was called a Calvary Chapel, San Juan Capistrano, and the preacher was Chuck Smith Jr. Now, I didn't know nothing about Calvary Chapel. I grew up in the Catholic Church where saxophone was kind of looked at like, oh, that's a bad instrument. You don't play that in church. But anyway, I thought, wow, this church, they play saxophone and they have a real drummer and rock and roll guitar, man. And these guys are professional musicians like me. And I'm like, this is pretty cool. So this guy, Rick Founds, asked me if I wanted to play there at his church. And you may recognize him as the writer of the worship song, Lord, I Lift Your Name on High. He was the writer of that tune. And so I started playing there. And by the way, that song is like listened to by more people probably than almost any song in the world, maybe ever. And anyway, he just happened to be my worship leader. And so I was getting used to this whole new California beach scene, where all these Christians were professional musicians like me. But I was keeping an eye on Colorado. And my home state was always kind of calling me back. I had grown up in Denver, born and raised in Denver, and I was a CU Buffs fan, a Broncos fan. And back in those days, if you weren't a CU fan or a Buffaloes fan, you were considered a traitor to your state, you know. But now I almost consider some of them guys a traitor to us, but that's a whole nother video. But anyway, So I was watching this guy, Bill McCartney, and he started this Christian men's thing called Promise Keepers. And I'm like, and I watched it, and they had done this stadium gig back in Boulder, uh, and I grew up just less than 20 miles from Boulder in the suburb of North Glen, and went through the school band system. Went to high school. I went to high school with this guy named Steve Taylor, who's a Christian rocker, and he's made films. Some of you know who I'm talking about. Well, I went to high school with him at this suburb in Denver, 20 miles from Boulder. So I was watching the CU Buffaloes become national champions, and this very on fire Christian coach, and he started this thing called PK, Promise Keepers, and he was starting to like gain numbers, explode. They did a stadium event at CU in Boulder, and they actually a music company actually called me and asked me for a saxophone recommendation for this event in Denver. That was a CU stadium, and I recommended a guy, uh, Brian Mahankey, for that gig because I wasn't flying back there for it. But so I recommended him for that gig at CU Boulder, and he had like 30, 40,000 people at that. And I was like, this thing's going to explode. This PK thing is going to be a revival. It's going to be big. And I could tell it was going to be big. And that was way back in like 1990, 91, And so I said, Lord, I want to be a part of that. And lo and behold, a few years later, while I was still out playing gigs in California and playing churches, then I got asked to join one of those PK bands. But before that, I'd been asked to actually lead up a PK band by this guy named Bob, and he asked me if I wanted to lead up a Promise Keepers band and do these things called wake up calls in LA. So we did all these wake up calls in LA in like 1994, and like several churches, Church on the Way. Church. There was a church I was playing at once in a while at in where was that? Anyway, I forget the city in California, and a whole bunch of other churches. And I actually led the band. I put it together for them and led the band, and we even did a rap tune or two because I was doing these little rap songs. So anyway, that ended, and then about a year later, in '95, the PK Promise Keepers thing, men's thing, exploded. And I consider the Promise Keepers thing a true, real Christian revival. Some people say, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. I'm like, I was there. I saw it. I watched it grow. And that was a real move of God. I'm telling you, man, that thing was the real deal. Because I watched it from 1990 up until 95 when I got involved and started playing in stadiums. And that thing was a real, true move of God. I mean, by 95, they were filling stadiums, man. I mean, stadiums full of men. And the first gig I did with those guys was at the Los Angeles Coliseum. And there was 100,000 men there. And I was like, wow, I had never seen anything like that. 100,000 men of every color, every race, every denomination, every ethnic background. I mean, I saw Christians in Indian headdress at that thing. I saw Christians in that were like wore the Mennonite type clothes. I saw Baptists at that thing. I saw Catholics at that thing. I saw Presbyterians. I saw evangelicals of every type. I saw more liturgical churches, Methodists, every Christian man imaginable at those PK events. So that was my first event, was at the Los Angeles Coliseum, and I'm like, this is a true move of God. I mean, I saw the LA Coliseum packed with 100,000 men. And then I played for those guys for the next 3 years. We did Soldier Field. We did Mile High Stadium. We played the Seattle Kingdom. We played the old Texas Stadium. We played Giant Stadium. You know, uh, we played all these stadiums all over the country, man. And those things were the biggest, most massive Christian events I've ever seen. And it started with this football coach that I was watching on TV because I was a CU football fan. And I'm like, that dude is on fire. That Christian coach out back in Colorado, where I was born and raised. And 5 years later, they were filling stadiums, packed stadiums, those gigs. I'd never seen anything like it, and I was part of the music team.